Well, good morning. Little double tracking there for a minute, but we remedied that. We figured out what we needed to do. Que pasa? What's happening? Robert Phoenix here with the Astro Weather. It is 8 a.m. on the 8th day of February, and yeah, we're here together. How is everyone? Hope you're having a spectacular morning. A spectacular. So, what does it mean to have a spectacular morning? For some people, it's waking up after a restful night's sleep, maybe a very interesting dream that perhaps provided them with a puzzle piece for their life. For some people, it's having a meditation, a 15-minute, 20-minute meditation where you feel grounded and centered. For other people, sometimes it just comes down to a really good shit, right? So, whatever it is, I hope you've experienced it and that you're ready to start the day. It's still a side note before we get into the weather. It's amazing how much athletes and athletics have changed, and I think this is kind of an Aquarian theme in a lot of ways. I was watching this interview with Kyle Juszczyk, who is a football player who plays for the San Francisco 49ers, who of course are in the Super Bowl this weekend. And there was a video footage of him and Christian McCaffrey. And apparently they follow somebody by the name of Andrew Huberman, who has one of these biohack channels. And they were actually out on the field. They had their shirts off. They had their pants rolled up. They had their shoes off. And they were literally connecting with early morning UV light, the sun, grounding themselves with their feet, you know, on the real turf, not fake turf. And somebody, I think it was George Kittle, who caught them on camera doing that. And I thought to myself, wow, we have really changed culturally when it comes to our athletes and what they're willing to do in order to train their bodies, get the highest level of maximum output, and this is not steroids, right? These are guys. I mean, and I don't think Kyle Juszczyk or Christian McCaffrey use steroids. Let me be on the record with that. These are natural hacks that they're practicing in their. So it's a very Aquarian thing, and I just kind of wanted to bring that up because it really struck me as like, wow, this is interesting. The face of our athletes and what they do has really, really changed. And again, this is another kind of Aquarian sort of observation. Apparently, Christian McCaffrey, the aforementioned Christian McCaffrey, goes to these workouts with surfers, and apparently, what they do is they go into a sauna and they ride these. I think they're called air bikes. They have, I think, fans that produce resistance in the wheels, and they do that for 20 minutes. And then apparently, what they do is they have, I guess they've set this thing up so that it's like a pool or a very, very enlarged tub, and then they will go from the intensity and the heat of the bike. And then what happens with this pool or this tub is that it mimics the conditions of what happens when you're taken under by a wave. Right. Again, this is Aquarius, so we're talking about waves and wave making, and you know, this whole idea that the contents, you know, of the heavens or the contents of the water kind of, you know, reaches down over you and that starts to put you into a spin cycle, which is what happens. And so it's so fascinating because what they're training themselves to do is that if they do big wave riding, again, a very Aquarian sort of notion, like the big wave, right? And we're in a big wave right now. Like we're kind of surfing Mavericks right now, and it's going to get bigger. It's going to get bigger. So what these guys do is they throw themselves into the tumbling turbulence of chaos. And that if they try to fight against the the turbulence and the chaos that's created that mimics what happens when you get taken under by a wave, it doesn't go well for them, right? So what they learn to do is they learn to kind of flatline when they're in that spin cycle so that their body naturally adjusts to whatever it needs to adjust to based on the conditions that it's being subjected to. And so for McCaffrey, what this does for him is he translates that into real-time performance. And when things are breaking down or when there's a high level of fight or flight, especially in a game of football, he's training his mind and body and translating that training and that kind of mimetic response so that he can reproduce that on a football field. And I thought to myself, fuck, we have come so far with athletic training in our lives. And I think that there's an interesting, kind of parallel corollary in our own lives. And how do we, if we're into, and we should be to some degree, if we're into maximizing our potential as spiritual beings inhabiting a physical body, that there are things that we can do. This is Aquarian season. There are things that we can do that can translate over kind of multiple platforms in our life. So part of today's theme with the show is rebelliousness and being a rebel. And I've always identified with the rebel, always throughout my entire life. And part of it has to do with my chart. Part of it has to do with when I grew up in California and I had Uranus on my ascendant. And Aquarius is a rebellious sign. And you'll see this with our star of the day today, who is emblematic of being a rebel. So what does it mean to be a rebel? A rebel is somebody who looks at things from a different perspective, that they're iconoclastic, that they will approach ideas or they'll approach systems or they'll approach methodologies in ways that break them, right? They challenge them, and then there can be, I think, really positive ramifications of that, and there can also be negative ramifications. Like the worst thing you can be is a rebel for the sake of being a rebel, right? That's not very rebellious. It's just not very rebellious. The best thing you could be is a rebel that is not considered being a rebel, right? And that's kind of because the whole idea with being a rebel has been played out. And now we're the most rebellious thing you could do in a lot of ways is quote unquote live a normal life. That's the most rebellious thing you can do. When rebellion has been commodified and purple hair is part of the uniform. And again, I don't want to slander anybody who has a ring in their nose, but it kind of goes back to that idea that we're going to modify our bodies and we're going to do this to our hair, and we're going to have theoretically the most extreme position we can find as it relates to the latest thing. That is the commodification of rebellion, and that is not rebellious. That is not rebellious. If anything, that is a kind of glaring example of the distortion of the mainstream. So let's get into the Astro Weather. And before I do, I guess the question is here, as we are deep into Aquarius, what do you do to make sure that you are not simply conforming to the pattern of your life? Because we all get stuck in ruts. We all get stuck in patterns. And the best case scenario for Aquarius is that it liberates us from that. And so we take the road less traveled, or we do something that's against the grain. We challenge at times our comfort and our conformity. And we put ourselves into situations where we have to adapt rather quickly. And through that adaptation, we can have kind of quantum moments of evolutionary development. So that's just an open-ended question for you guys. All right, why don't we get into the weather? I got a hard stop today again at 8:45. Let me see what we got here. Here it is. It's funny. There are days when Astro Dienst has really hard lines, like the bleeding Crayola crayon color outside the lines, just about, or white felt tip marker lines, and then other days, eh, reasonable. Here we go. Get out of here. Get out of here. All right, here we go. All right, here comes that moon. This is the moon we were talking about. The balsamic moon. Let's zoom in. Okay, so that moon is at 1 degree, right on Pluto. Wherever you are in this place in the space, things are intense today. But it's a weird intensity, right? It's like this intensity that is detached and scientific, but it's just everything about Pluto and Aquarius is what I was talking about. It's rebellious, but and what I find fascinating is that we've basically spent, I talked about this yesterday, we've basically spent, um, we'll go back to, let's say, 2000, 2009, 2008 with the election of Barack Obama. And that was a very Aquarian moment in a lot of ways. Very, very Aquarian moment. We're picking a president, theoretically, who is different than all the previous presidents. We're picking a president who is not just different from skin tone, but his name is different, right? Everything about Obama is like this break from previous regimes or previous presidential um, tones, right? And it's a very, very Aquarian moment. And it's one of those moments, again, where theoretically it joins a lot of people together. And I think that there were people who said to themselves, well, I feel proud to be an American. And he gave his acceptance speech from Denver, which I thought was really interesting. Like one of the highest places in this country that you could give a presidential address. It was almost like he'd reached the mountaintop, and America was with him there together. Right, this was in a lot of ways, our pinnacle moment. Like everything that had been fought for with the whole civil rights movement, which, by the way, takes place with Saturn and Aquarius from 1962, 3 years to 1965. 1965, the Civil Rights Act is signed, right? So it's a very kind of Aquarian moment. It's the culmination of an Aquarian moment from that period. It is the sun of the civil rights movement. And this is it, right? This is the moment that Americans can feel proud of. And theoretically, it joins us all together in one family, one community. Not everybody felt that way. I didn't, but that's the way a lot of people did. And so we've been living with that Aquarian version of our world since then. And then everything that has gone along with that, which includes the very rebellious forms of governance, such as Marxism, communism, social Marxism, wokeism. That's all downstream from that moment. That's very Aquarian. And I'm going to talk about this today on 15 Minutes of Flame. By the way, the link is in the notes for the show. And that we have been in a cultural revolution. We have been, and the cultural revolution has been going on for a long time, but it really ramped up in 2008. So when we get to this point here with the moon, and this is all tied into collective energy. When we get into these outer signs, and I would say, yeah, it really does start with Sagittarius, and then it culminates in Aries, which becomes a very personal energy. This is a very interesting conjunction with the moon and Pluto. And how do we, as individuals, people that are watching this stream, how do you react to what is now the status quo, right? When we have radical immigration policies, how do you react to the status quo? That has become the status quo, by the way, and that has been happening for a while now. How do you react to, well, it's going to be status quo to just pass another omnibus bill, right? I don't think people are ready for, and I feel like, again, when we get out to this Aquarian zone, which I talked about yesterday, the individual is really dialed in to the collective, and the collective is dialed into the individual. So we're experiencing these things that are big ticket items, but we're personalizing them in a lot of ways, because what does Aquarius point to? It points towards the future. And again, we talked, this is so funny. I talked about Tucker Carlson yesterday. And I talked about, I think the reason why Tucker Carlson is doing this is because of his kids and his grandkids. And he actually mentioned that in his brief little monologue, or his intro to the forthcoming Vladimir Putin interview. And this is what we're talking about here with Moon and Pluto, right? So the moon is our legacy, it's our roots, it's what we inherit. And in a lot of ways, it's what we carry moving forward. So this is a very powerful moon. And I think, again, under the auspices of Aquarius, we're looking at, what is our legacy? Where are our values? What do we stand for? I remember back in 2010, I just realized that the most rebellious thing you could do was to move away from this idea that, you could do as thou wilt. That was the most rebellious thing that I could do. And over time, I began to map out my own inner topography that went along with that, which included ultimately moving to Texas from California. And I spent a lot of time in Marin County. I spent a lot of time in San Francisco. The electronic dance, ambient trance scene, right? I wasn't polyamorous, but I knew a lot of people in the polyamory community in Marin County, right? Like, all that stuff was just there in low-hanging fruit if you wanted it. But what I saw was a rising tide of what I would call spiritual elitism. And it actually made me kind of sick to my stomach. So eventually, through my own, I guess, inner promptings and the kind of the evolution of my family life, I moved to Texas, which was Austin is kind of California light, but now I live in a place which is anything but California. And a lot of it was conscious, because I didn't want to be caught in that net of what I would call superficiality. And I feel like that's where we are, right, with this Moon Pluto conjunction. And again, this moon is balsamic. So what are we letting go of? And I think that this can go in either direction. Like, if you, and in a lot of ways, I'm not alone. I feel like I was kind of at the beginning of a wave, but I look around, and it became the most rebellious thing to do was to become a patriot, or the most rebellious thing to do was to be a MAGA person, or the most rebellious thing you could do was to, put America first. Those are radical concepts. They're radical, right? And the thing that this Moon Pluto conjunction does is it causes us to question our stance. So you can be on the other side of this equation with all the accoutrements of the blue hair and the piercings and the Ukrainian flag, whatever, right? And then you can be on the other side of that equation and have everything that would be 180 degrees to the south of that. And what the Moon Pluto conjunction does is it questions both of those extreme positions. right? It questions our attachments to the things that we believe separate us out and make us individuals. What happened here? Give me a second. I think the internet blinked. There we go. You understand what I'm saying? So this is an important time here. Now, the other thing too is when we get into the moon, we get into things like family. And in Aquarius, our family gets turned on its head. It has to do with the extended family. It doesn't always have to do with your blood kin, right? So the Moon Pluto conjunction breaks us out of our family mold, or again, because we're dealing with Aquarius, it breaks us into our family mold. This could be a very interesting day where people will need you in a familial sense that they may not have needed you before. They may have been on their uh, ideological stampede and saw what you were doing and thought it was dangerous. And now they're in a position where they may need you, right? This is the Moon Pluto conjunction. And in this balsamic position, they may need you. And what do you do? What do you do at that point? Do you say, fuck you? You made your own bed? This is an interesting phase for this moon, right? Because we're moving into this kind of rebirth moment. And look, the sun and the part of fortune are exactly together today. Of course, if you're in San Antonio, it would be somewhere else if you were somewhere else. But I also think that with the moon conjunct Mercury, you have to communicate it. And sometimes that communication can be very unemotional. Aquarius is not an emotional sign. And I think that this is a really good time to be able to communicate and articulate what you feel without being triggered. And we all have high trigger moments, high trigger response. And, I had something happen to me yesterday. I'm not going to talk about it, but at some point I will. And I was in the midst of this transit, like really in the midst of this transit. Like the astrology was in that moment. The thing that I was talking about to you was applying to me. So this is a very powerful time. This next 24 hours, extremely powerful. By the time we get to Friday and we just have this moon sun conjunction and then this new moon on the other side of the sun is incredibly important. And I want to stress that because I think it's important. I think it is vital to understand that astrology is a system. And all systems have their they have their kind of event horizons. A system is a system. And this thing, life, transcends systems. And we can use systems to understand life to the best of our ability. But, we come to the end of the road with systems. Like ultimately, they're a cul-de-sac. And usually what we do is if you're a Sagittarian, you adopt another system. Well, here's a better system, right? It's a bigger system. It's a more inclusive system. It's a more expansive system. And it is astrology a system. That said, I am operating within the bounds of the system to share that this is an important time. How you respond emotionally now with this Moon Pluto conjunction in the balsamic space or the balsamic phase is going to determine your emotional output as Pluto moves through Aquarius. Think about that. And some of you might say, well, shit, that's a lot of pressure and responsibility. And then I would ask you as an invitation to ponder the possibility, that over the next 48 hours, that you can reattune your emotional input so that for the next 20 years, you are when I say 20 years, I'm really talking, it's less than 20 now, but it had to do with the Jupiter Saturn conjunction in Aquarius in 2020. So for the next 16 years, which is roughly the transit of Pluto through Aquarius, that you are emotionally in sync with the time. Think about that. That what you do, how you respond emotionally, what your intentions are, that if you navigate this and you can emotionally tune yourself to that, your path and your journey over the next 16 years will be more in alignment with your emotional values. And if we live with this idea that we create our own reality, which I do believe that there is a very, there's a lot of investment, or there's a lot of proof that that is true. Try being a negative asshole for an extended period of time and see where that gets you. Your reality will reflect that. Be generous to people over an extended period of time, and guess what will happen? Your reality will reflect that. Be generous to yourself, which is, you know what? I'm going to do something. And it doesn't have to be like, hey, I'm going to have a third slice of that coconut cream pie. No, it's like, I'm going to invest in, like, fuck it. I invested in this stretching program down the road. It's cost me $600. I don't give a fuck. That's being generous because I want my body to be more, pliable, supple. That's what I'm talking about. So we're wrapping our arms around this possibility that you can set your emotional compass over the next 48 hours. Now, not without some work, because when we get into this Moon Pluto conjunction, again, we're asked, what do we let go of? What needs to die? What needs to die? And the good news is that Moon in Aquarius, even though it's fixed, we can have a more objective relationship with our emotions. We can be more, to some degree, analytical. Doesn't mean that letting go is any easier, because when we get into fixed signs, it's wrenching. It's just absolutely wrenching, and you have to almost tear these things apart when it's in a fixed sign. But at the very least, one's emotional perspective doesn't get attached to the letting go is easy, right? So again, really powerful time. And then we look what's happening out there. And what's happening out there and what's happening in here is, to me, a very fascinating potential for a synchronous connection to the inner and the outer. Now, for some people, it might drive them nuts, but just watch for synchronicities, watch for things happening that mirror your own inner experience. So, anyway, fascinating. We are in fascinating times, fascinating transits, and I hope that everybody can successfully navigate. And you know what? Let's say you fuck up. You say, oh shit, I had 48 hours and I fucked up. No, you didn't fuck up. You know why? Because it's Aquarius. That's why. And even a perceived fuck up, can thoroughly work out in your favor. So don't get attached to that's the thing about Aquarius too. It's like, don't get attached to the outcome. Don't get attached to the outcome. Do your best. Don't get attached to the outcome. Okay. Venus, Mars. So this is interesting. In Capricorn, we talked about this kind of, this tango between Venus and Mars from Capricorn. They're going to be kind of dancing with each other for a while, right? And we're talking about the masculine and the feminine, and this the blend between the two, where the masculine and the feminine are, working much more closely together in a lot of ways. So that manifests again in your own life with, times, you're the one that's driving the chariot, and other times you're sitting in the passenger seat with the map, right? And it goes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. It's very interesting from that perspective, and it's going to continue on that kind of path through Aquarius. On the other side of this Venus Mars conjunction is also, because it's in Capricorn, is this kind of hermaphroditic quality between Venus and Mars coming together, the masculine and the feminine, right? And this whole idea of Baphomet, which is very much Capricornian in its manifestation. I think it'll be interesting to watch during the Super Bowl and what kind of images that we get that reflect things like goats, Baphomet energy, the horn gods, right? These are all part of this this dance that I'm talking about. And Michelle Obama keeps coming up as this potential candidate that will pop into the race. And for everybody who knows what I'm talking about, Michelle Obama is a Capricorn and theoretically possesses some of the traits of the aforementioned Baphomet. So keep your eyes on that, and keep your eyes on uh, the big O. Okay, let's see. Anything else that I want to talk about? I think a lot of it is a kind of a reiteration of yesterday. Not a lot of fire in the air, lots of air, lots of earth, and a fair amount of water. Get grounded, stay busy. And in the midst of all this kind of Aquarian uh, transformation, stay grounded. All right, let's talk about our star of the day, our True Hemp Science star of the day. Our True Hemp Science star of the day is none other than the rebel without a cause, James Dean. Interesting little mudra Mr. Dean is doing down there, isn't it? This is this is just screaming secret society. So this is the triad claw, or the claw of the triad. Do you see that? And then it looks like he is probably doing the horns of Baphomet. Mr. Dean was an initiate, wasn't he? He's a Uranus rising, or Uranus on the ascendant, Aries rising. Of course, he's going to be rebellious. Of course, he's going to be. He becomes the archetype of rebellion in America, and it comes from the movie Rebel Without a Cause, which also stars Natalie Wood, Dennis Hopper, and Sal Mineo. I think Nick Adams is in that movie as well. And that's a theme that Dean would carry forward in almost all of his movies, including East of Eden and Giant, which he plays the young, rebellious brother to Rock Hudson. Giant is kind of an epic movie in a lot of ways. But this is Dean, live fast, die young, leave a good corpse. I'm not sure if his corpse looks so good. But you can see this here, right? You can see that was the role he was going to play. And he was going to do pretty much anything that he needed to do in order to play that role. That role meaning that role in his life, or that movie role. Right. And Dean had this weird obsession with Marlon Brando. And Marlon Brando happens to be an Aries. And Marlon Brando used to laugh that James Dean used to sit outside of his apartment for days and wait to be invited in. And Brando used to toy with him. uh, Dean is the heartthrob. He's got Venus up here on the midheaven. And I think in many ways, he kind of sets the tone for the rebel as being kind of metrosexual in some ways. Like he's a small guy. James Dean is a small guy, and if you put some lipstick and some mascara and put a nice wig on him, he'd probably make a pretty chick. But that's and girls loved him. He was, again, this whole idea of teen idols kind of comes out of James Dean. It's all happening at the same time. It's rock and roll, it's rebellion, it's those teen idol magazines, it's Madison Avenue, wrapping their throats around the baby boomer generation. And Dean is not a baby boomer. He's born under Pluto and Cancer, but he becomes the identification or the symbol for baby boomers. He's got Mars and Leo in the fifth house, which means that, guess what? He's an actor. And James Dean was a great actor. He was an absolutely great actor. And he's got that sun in the 11th house, which makes him not only kind of a star, but good in an ensemble cast. But in an ensemble cast, more than likely he'll stand out, which is really what he did, especially in Rebel Electra. I mean, there were some good performances in there. Dennis Hopper was great. Natalie Wood was great, but Dean clearly stole the show. And we have Saturn here on the midheaven, and what's in the 10th house. And I suppose if we're using astrology, that James Dean's father would have played a role in his life, for better or worse. That's Saturn in the 10th house. But even so, with Uranus here squaring Saturn, Uranus-Saturn squares are rebellious, where Saturn-Uranus squares are rebellious. There's this rebellious theme against the status quo, against authority. So he's flat out rebellious. And Jupiter square Uranus, rebellion pays. It pays off for him. But at the end of the day, he doesn't live very long, and he gets into an auto accident. And here we have this Pluto Mercury opposition. Mercury rules traveling, communication, and I would be interested. Maybe if you have a Mercury Pluto opposition in your chart, I'd be interested if you could leave a comment in the chats or in the chat or in the comment section if you've gotten into a serious auto accident. An auto accident that may have potentially changed your life, perhaps even potentially ended your life, right? So I think that's how Mercury Pluto lines up in terms of Dean and travel. And even that Mercury square, going on with Uranus, which is sudden, quick. And Dean was somebody who was trying to turn himself into, a race car. He wasn't very big, so he fit the mold. Race car drivers are like horse jockeys. You kind of need to be small, less drag on the actual equipment. Although there are some race car drivers who are taller than others, but Dean fits into that kind of, tin jockey mold. Neptune in the 6th house. Again, if his profession, the thing that he does every day is Neptunian, acting can work for somebody with Neptune in the 6th house. And this whole idea of him having kind of straight relationships is undermined with the South Node in Libra over in the 7th house, because he's got his true node conjuncting Aries, conjuncting Uranus, conjuncting the ascendant. So his orientation is going to be more around men and less around women, more around Mars, less around Venus. And the anger in his chart is palpable, right? When he would act and that anger would come out, he's channeling that Mars Moon square, that moon in Scorpio, which also I think helped for his popularity with that sextile to Venus, kind of capturing the public eye with his visage, right? With his looks. What else? I think he was misunderstood. He was really misunderstood, even by people who thought they knew him. Why do I say that? It's the sun. And his sun doesn't have any real major aspects. It's borderline singleton. He has the inconjunct with Pluto, and I think what might be interesting about that inconjunct with Pluto is that we might, well, I think we do. I think we do understand him more in depth than we did when he was alive, right? And that's, to me, that's the Pluto inconjunct, right? The past catches up to the future, and Cancer is clearly the past, and Aquarius is the future, in a rare kind of intersection between these two planets. That's what's taking place. All right, there's your True Hemp Science star of the day, the rebel without a cause, James Dean. Along Came a Spider, the whole song by the Eagles, James Dean. True Hemp Science is our sponsor, and if you are interested in real hemp products that have an impact on your daily life, go to truehempscience.com, type in 15MINS, that's 15MINS, spend $100 or more, and you will get free goodies with your order. And trust me, the goodies are good. You'll like them. $150 or more, you get free shipping, and there's always a 30-day money-back guarantee. That's truehempscience.com, and 15MINS is your code to get the free goodies. Please hit the like button, subscribe, hit the notification button, and if you'd like to, you're more than welcome to buy me a cup of coffee. Links are in the show notes, or the link is in the show note. Oh, the links for everything is in the show notes. True Hemp Science, robertphoenix.com for reading, buying me a cup of coffee, and that's it. Use your head in order to discern what's real, your heart to set what's possible. The other link for 15 Minutes of Flame is also in there. And I'll see you guys over there, and we'll be back here tomorrow. Take care. Bye for now.